As of the published date of this episode, I am an associate of Ulta Beauty. The ideas and thoughts represented here are my own and not that of my employer. Hi, everyone, and welcome to the Scaling Emerging Beauty podcast, a podcast that provides actionable insights for brands that are looking to scale from 0 to 20 million using retail growth. For today's episode, I'm so excited to be joined by Shannara Goode, an expert in inventory management. Here's a snippet from our conversation.
I think it's also really critical that as you are putting together your plan to scale, like again, going back to the importance of inventory management, you should really be thinking about investing a chunk of your dollars to that specific conversation, whether it be investing via in-house personnel or investing via a brokerage. Like there should be a nice chunk of money that you are putting aside for this conversation, because again, this is the most expensive thing that you are going to own.
Let me tell you a little bit more about Shannara. Shannara started her retail career at Target and went to a variety of other places, including incubators. She's worked across apparel, accessories, beauty, and personal care. And she's actually back at Target now as a director over inventory management. She has a plethora of ideas around inventory management on both the brand side and also on the retailer side. And so I thought she'd be a fantastic guest to talk about this super critical topic, inventory management. I'm really excited for you all to hear our conversation, and that's what's up next after a brief word from our sponsor. I'd like to take a moment to thank the sponsor for the Scaling Emerging Beauty podcast, the Emerson Group. Through their support, we're able to continue to talk to industry experts to provide early stage brands with strategies and tactical insights on what they can do to help their business grow better. Thank you again to the Emerson Group for their continued support. And let's go ahead and continue with the show. Thank you for being here. I love that you have experience both at the big eye of Target, but also working with some of these smaller indie brands, because in our topic today, which is inventory management, it can really look different. Well, yes, I guess in some cases it might not look that different from the big brands to the little brands, but the support systems and all of that, I feel like I've been in retail for over 10 years now. Yeah. And inventory management and supply chain is always a challenge in that, how can we be efficient? How can we manage this better? How can we move to a different system that's going to help us track things better? Yes. How can we manage digital so that inventory is not costing us more than our store inventory? Yes. So much. And so I'm really excited to focus today's conversation around inventory management as it relates to emerging brands and their success. Yeah, absolutely. And so I just love to start off, generally speaking, how would you say inventory, or rather, what role would you say inventory management plays in a brand's success? Yeah. So it's so crazy. Just earlier this week, I was talking to an emerging brand, and what I said to them is, here's the thing, inventory management and kind of like some of those initial first like months to even that first year kind of makes or breaks your success in a retail format. It really does. Just like you said, the supply chain and how we operate it has evolved so much. Technology in a way has almost made it even more difficult because there's so many more hoops to jump through and so many more, the EDI and this and that and the PO, like there's just so many other terms and like processes that you have to go through. But as an emerging brand, like that is if you have to nail anything at the very beginning of your relationship as you try and scale to retail, inventory management and that successful kind of like how you're setting yourself up is so critical to the long-term relationship. And I think that, when I was talking to this brand in particular, I was like, do not get there until you are ready. Because when you start to get into the Targets and the Walmarts, the CVSs, the Walgreens, like there's some, especially like, for example, through an accelerator program, there's definitely some support there, but not everyone has that like opportunity to go through, a well-vetted program to get to a retailer. But the retailers still have an expectation that this is kind of like that bare minimum of what we expect you to be able to do.
And if that's not met, that kind of puts your name on the line and that level of professionalism. And are they going to be able to meet our standards? So short answer is extremely important. How you go about it, though, I think there's always a way in which you can work with, whether it be brokers or obviously hiring experts. I think a lot of emerging brands are understanding the importance of like having someone in operations or supply chain specialties within their personnel, so very important. I think it should be a high priority at all times. But I do acknowledge the fact that it is also a very complex thing. It's not just something that you flip on and flip off and suddenly it's like you're an expert at it. So
that's such good advice and so many really salient points in terms of this can kind of make or break you. And very much so because your inventory support then ties back into your sales.
Correct.
And then, you can have a chicken or egg discussion then with your merchant, which is saying, hey, your sales, you're not performing as a brand. And then you're coming and saying, well, we really haven't been supporting you with inventory. So we can't say that it's sales.
So we can't support you with the sales. Yeah.
And it's like, well, yeah, but then sometimes depending on the retailer, depending on the merchant, the priorities going on at that time, there might not be an answer because at the end of the day, it's like the sales. Right. And so that's
what am I
really
taking to the bank? Yep.
Yeah. Like you can't sell a thing if it's not on the shelf. And so I think that's really important. I also know that when brands are looking to scale, like starting off, that looks a lot different than maybe once they have scaled and they're at 1,800, 2,000 stores.
Absolutely.
And so you talked a little bit about brokers, talked about leveraging some partners. Can you just share a little bit more about how or why that can benefit an emerging brand, but also maybe some of the watch outs? Like, I'd love to kind of do a comparison between like doing it yourself and hiring maybe like an ops team versus contracting it out through a broker or 3PL of sorts.
Yeah, for sure. So I think, and I've done it both ways, depending on the brand that I've worked for. And I think it kind of goes back to that, like, are you a mom and pop? Do you have the resources? Do you not? There's no secret that a brokerage is going to come at a pretty penny. There's a reason why they're experts. There's a reason why that they've created a business model that a lot of people tap into, right? So they are definitely going to come at an expense. Now, I feel like brokers do have an element of like kind of a tiered, right, support system. They might just help you with kind of initial how we transmit orders and how we, kind of start those conversations and those relationships all the way through. Like, you don't even need to speak to the retailer. Just tell us what you want and we'll do all the work for them. So the nice thing about going through a broker is that most of them almost have like a menu of options that you can select through and that you can kind of tailor to whatever your budget is. Or you can go the route where you do have someone a bit more in-house. I personally was that person in-house that we then, as we were scaling brands beyond just one individual brand, we then went to the broker route so that we can kind of like spread our resources. But I know for a startup that I was a part of, I was that person that really kind of helped at least lay the groundwork for like, how do we go and speak to a retailer? What are some of the things that we need to make sure that we are very clear in? What are inventory positions and even like volumes that we need to first kind of start with? So I really do think it's how much financial support, right? Are you being backed by investors? Like, how are you budgeting? I think it's also really critical that as you are putting together your plan to scale, like, again, going back to the importance of inventory management, you should really be thinking about investing a chunk of your dollars to that specific conversation, whether it be investing via in-house personnel or investing via a brokerage. Like, there should be a nice chunk of money that you are putting aside for this conversation. Because again, this is the most expensive thing that you are going to own. The inventory is the most expensive line item, right? Especially if you're selling a good, which
brands.
Exactly. Yeah. So I really do feel like it is critical for you. Decide on whether you want it in-house or a brokerage. I think in-house, to me, it felt like the right choice, especially because our emerging brands, we were specifically working with majority minority owned brands. And we just thought that the the message we really wanted to send is that this really is homegrown. This really is kind of like every employee here has a stake in the game here, versus going to a retailer with a brokerage that sometimes can feel a little bit more transactional, and that like emotional maybe pull or story that you're trying to tell isn't necessarily captured by the brokerage. So it kind of, I would say there's a lot of that depends on it, but definitely no matter what, I would say like in terms of your investment towards the inventory effort, like it should feel significant in my opinion.
You're absolutely right that inventory investment is going to be likely your biggest expense on your on your balance sheet.
Yeah.
Because I mean, nobody's salary really compares to that, especially depending on the size and the scale.
Yep.
When you were talking about kind of like brokerage versus bringing it in-house, you touched on a little bit about numbers, and it made me think of forecasting and making sure you get things right. I'm curious because I hear this a lot from emerging brands, like that once they get the PO, it's like, how do I know what the right forecast is? How do I understand how fast this is going to sell? And I know I have my response, but I'd love to hear your thoughts on how you approach an initial forecast. Like, what questions would you say emerging brands should ask? Or maybe it's like a couple of questions. It's like, how would you do it? And then what questions would you recommend brands ask their retailers or other folks so that they get that right forecast?
Yep. That's a great question. And again, note that I have the background and the experience in various brands, whether it be personal care, whether it be apparel. So like the knowledge that I'm going to be able to bring to a team is I know a relative rate of sale of, a concealer versus
just
a body wash.
You just
right. Yeah, I've got.
She's like, yeah,
you're right.
0.5 units per store per week,
right,
honey.
Correct. So like I have that as a frame of reference. So also know that like if you don't know that, that is okay. Because unless you have the industry knowledge, like you don't walk around being like, yep, I don't walk into a store and look at a box of mac and cheese and say, oh, I bet that sells 7 units per week. I have no experience in mac and cheese. I have very little experience in food and bev. So please also know, like, if this is something that you're coming up against, like that's normal, especially if you are newer to the space. Now, that being said, that's why the brokers or the in-house personnel experts are really critical to have in this space, because it is also really critical that you do get that right. Because again, going back to one of your biggest expenses is going to be that inventory. The last thing you want to do is go out there and buy all of this inventory that quite frankly was never going to sell because that rate of sale, it was completely wrong.
Ridiculous. So, and even a half a unit at a big retailer, a mass retailer especially, can make
0.5 times 1,800, 2,000, 4,000. Like that is a lot of money that you were wasting. That's a lot of money.
It's like and then you times it like 0.5 times 1,800. If you call it stores, then you multiply it times, whatever your retail is.
You got weeks per, like there's, come on now. Come on. So yes, I would say the questions that you should be asking, or like if you have an in-house person, to understand their level of expertise, you should be asking them, and whether it be like an interview setting or if you're having them consult for you, like ask them those questions of like, what is an industry standard, right? What is the industry standard? This is my relative price point, because all of these numbers are also going to shift dependent on your price point, dependent on whether you're specialty versus mass, like your ingredient story. I mean, there's a lot of these things, right? You also have to make money, but making sure that they understand like like a rate of sale or a general rate of sale for whatever industry that you're in. I think that that's really critical to ask an individual that is maybe coming in-house. Now, the nice thing about a broker is that they will have access to certain data points. They subscribe to certain, what's the word I'm looking for? Like
data sets?
Yes, exactly. Like they have like access to a lot of that where they can, companies they basically input into, so they could also get industry outputs. So brokerages will have access to some of that information. So that's something to go ahead and ask them of like, hey, are you able to pull data on industry standards for XYZ type of classification of an item? So that's a route you can take. And then also too, I would say, if you are like, once you do finally start to work with a retailer, right, as you start to have those initial conversations, most buyers, because think about it, the buyer needs you to excel, so they excel. So use some of those first conversations with the merchant that you're working with to, now they're never going to tell you this brand sells this much, that they can't tell you, right? But they are going to tell you, for you to perform as a part of the assortment, you need to be able to meet 0.35 sales per store per week. They are going to give you that information, because if you fail, they fail. They have to be productive. Your SKU has to work hard for them on their shelf. So that is an okay question and conversation to have with the merchant. And they will likely frame it up in, you need to be able to make this level of productivity. And that's kind of how they'll frame it up, at least to give you some guidance on sales rate and whatnot.
That's really good. And I do say, if you don't know to ask, it is very important to know that buyers should be giving you some semblance of a benchmark.
Correct.
And talk to them and ask, I would say, like, what is your current benchmark? And do you expect me to perform there?
Correct.
Or, do you have a kind of entry level benchmark, that you provide to an emerging brand, where I can kind of scale up to that, so that I'm not expected to come out the gates swinging and performing at the same rate as a national brand,
Correct.
Especially if you're on a shelf with a lot of other competitors.
Yep. And if a merchant is I think this is another thing to go into thinking, like, if a merchant isn't expecting you to perform as an emerging brand, that's the wrong merchant. Like, to Monique's point, like, you have to make sure that you're being benchmarked appropriately for your industry, for your business model. I think retailers today, they understand the importance of having emerging brands on their shelves. And a lot of them do make, I don't want to call them exceptions, but they start to plan their financial outlook and their financial forecast to afford an emerging brand that may not be as profitable for them, because they know they've got the other national brands that are extremely profitable to kind of like almost wash that out. So if your buyer isn't setting realistic expectations, to me, that's saying that there's something not aligned with the relationship. And I think that's something to make sure that you are really hearing. Don't just hear, oh my God, I got this great meeting with this great retailer and I'm automatically going to do everything that they say. Make sure that you're also doing your brand a service, because you also have that loyal DTC customer. And what you don't want to do is like dilute that business just to be in a retailer that, quite frankly, isn't a good match for you.
So we talked a little bit about like that initial forecast when you're setting up, if you want to call it your initial pipe, your big fill. Yep. So kind of like we're setting an empty shelf with an item. So that's going to be your big order. But then there's also reorders.
Yep.
Or replenishment, depending on what you talk about. And I know that there's a term called demand forecasting that is oftentimes used in retail. Oftentimes related to this idea of replenishing the order. Can you talk about demand forecasting and some ways to manage this effectively, and specifically when you are still, again, that new brand, like seasonality, like to talk about some of the things to take into consideration, because sometimes it's like it's viral and it's great, but it's just a moment in time. And other times it's like, oh, it's slowing down. Do we adjust our demand forecasting? Do we slow down our manufacturing reorder because we might not need as much as we thought we were going to need?
Yep, absolutely. So when it comes to your demand forecast profile, I would say like there is an element of, I know from being a DTC, like being established on DTC, I know kind of like when my peaks and valleys are, right? If I am selling an SPF product, I know that one of my peak seasons is going into the summer. I know if I'm selling a holiday trinket or something, I don't know, my peak season is kind of like as I go into November, December timeframe. So there's some of that I would say, like, your demand forecast, don't overcomplicate it. Like it's a lot of it is what you already know about your brand. But in addition to that, kind of like going back to the conversation and the relationship that you would have with your merchant, like they also should have a understanding. Again, they're the ones who carry multiple products. It's not just yours. So they should also be able to help inform peaks and valleys particular to their consumer, particular to their guest, their customer, whatever, however they, refer to them. They should be able to tell you that information. What they should also be able to tell you is these are our big promo moments, right? We always have a promotion, at the beginning of February. We always have a promotion for Black Friday. So they're going to be able to also provide you that level of information as well. So like all of that, these data points become your demand forecast. So it's really a marry between you knowing your consumer and them being able to tell you from a retail point of view, like what are those really important key moments that they already have mapped out in their sales profile, also called, it can be referred to as their demand forecast as well. So it's a really nice like art and science between the two of you guys in that relationship.
That was such a good explanation, Shannara. I'm like, wow, I totally get that. So thank you.
You're welcome.
Sometimes, we hope this never happens to any of the brands that are listening, but sometimes brands will face issues with refilling orders. Outside of the fact that, you're going to have some chargebacks,
yes.
Which is basically the retailer is essentially charging you a penalty for not filling the order that they requested. So if I request 100 and you send me 80, shoot, if you send me 99, you
getting that. Yep,
you're
correct.
gonna get, you owe me because you didn't send me what I asked.
Yep.
But specifically focusing on the retail side of things, I'm curious, how do you think brands should prioritize things with retailers when they face those refill challenges? How should they communicate things to the retailer?
Yeah.
If there's like a retailer A and retailer B, how would you recommend they prioritize? Like, both retailers, let's say, if both of them, across of them, they say they want 5,000 units, but a brand only has 2,000 units to fill. Do they split that 2K across retailer A and B? Do they send all to retailer A? Tell us how you would advise a brand to manage inventory if they don't have enough.
Yeah, that is, again, having worked with smaller brands, that is a massive, I would say like concern, but it also happens a lot. So I think kind of like even going back to what I was saying earlier about like, don't be afraid to ask the questions. Like also know that like this is retail at the end of the day. Shortages, PO shipment delays, like all of these things happen. Hey, I've even had it one time where a vendor had a boat where snakes were on it. You know what I mean? So like things, it happens. So things happen. And so like, I also like want to make sure that like, we know that like, it's retail. Every single day is going to be different. That being said, I think you even hit the nail on the head. Number one, please communicate it. Communicate it. What is the worst thing that you could possibly do is have it happen and us be like so caught off guard because you never even kept us up to speed. I think this is a thing that like I see a lot of small brands do. Like they try to fix it, like, build the bike while you're riding it. So they try to fix it. Hopefully it comes to fruition and like, they'll never know. We will know. Okay. So communicate it and communicate it as soon as you know. Even if it's, and this is my personal, preference and recommendation is even if you have knowledge of, hey, there's going to be a delay, we do not know when it will be delayed until. I would still rather know that there is a delay and a potential disruption, even if I may not find out the ETA until a month later. Tell me as soon as you know there's a delay.
I can plan for it. I can, put that. And that might mean that you won't participate in this promotion.
Yep.
And trust me, that's better for you in the end.
In the relationship.
Trust that, the retailers know what they're doing if there are consequences, if you will, as a result of that. But it will be, to your point, better for the long run.
Correct. So like, please communicate that to your partner, because just like you want them to be good partners to you, you need to be good partners to them. This is a relationship now that you are in, that you guys are both funding. So like, be mindful of that. And then I would say from a prioritization standpoint, I'm not of the belief that you should 100% short one to fund another. That being said, there's always a customer that really writes your checks and a customer that helps pay the gas bill. So I would say, like, within reason, start to look at that kind of weight. So is one retailer 80% of your business? If they are, then maybe 80% of that order needs to be going to them, right? So I don't want you to completely cut off relationships with another retailer. Now, again, this is all relative. So for example, if we're talking about the difference between working with a Walmart where you're fulfilling $5,000 and you want to try to save 100 units for retailer B, like, just give Walmart the whole PO, right? Give them all of the buy, and we'll manage that relationship with a smaller retailer. So I would say I don't think that there's a right or wrong answer. I think it depends on a lot of factors of where is that relationship with that retailer? Has this happened before with that retailer? Is this the very first time? Like, there's so many elements there that you have to consider, that every scenario, that anytime this happens, you might have to like weigh into your ultimate decision of whether or not we're going to short some, short all, etc. But I cannot stress to you guys enough that communication is the very first piece that you like need to nail.
I love that recommendation on where to assign the inventory based on the retailer. That's a really great tip. So thank you for that. I say it's better to under promise and over deliver. So even if you think like, oh, I think we're going to have this in stock, but I'm not sure, go ahead and communicate that, hey, there's about an 80% chance that this is not going to be in stock, or that we're not going to get this replenishment order. So I just want to give you that heads up. We're feeling good about it. But if that changes, we'll let you know. Go ahead and communicate that. What are some other mistakes that you see emerging brands make when they're entering big retail as it relates to kind of inventory management? Because I'm sure the communication piece, I think, is a big one, because I think they don't realize, like, no, we're going to know. And the retailers are going to know.
Right. Like, at the end of the day, there's a reason why they've been in business for however long. Like, everything has floated across their desk. So it's like, they're going to know when that happens. I think something to me, especially in emerging brands, that, I mean, and this is maybe less inventory, if I can just have a moment, and more if I were to think of like product in general in the personal care space. I think one of the things that I cannot stand, and something that you need to be so mindful of, is like, are you being as transparent as you actually say that you're being? I have seen various scenarios, especially as we talk about like beauty and personal care, where that ingredient story is so critical to who you are as a brand. I just think that little things like that start to really chip away at the trust that you have with, or that you've built with the retailer. And I'm talking about things as far, like, even to the point of, okay, I've just gotten a new retailer, and this is an actual example. I've just gotten a new retailer business. I'm really excited about it. I've got inventory that is newly shipping, and maybe we had a new formula. Maybe this is like kind of that brand new batch. I've got another batch though. This is a formula that like we really didn't like as much. The shelf life is about to be out. You know, maybe I've only got 3 months left on my shelf life. I'm going to ship that to this retailer, right? Bad.
No.
Bad.
I said she is not about to say. She is not gonna say you're gonna ship that.
Yes. Like, y'all, these are things that, like, to me, I'm like, it's like an ethical thing. Like, I'm sorry,
you were thinking that. I was like, be ethical.
I've seen that before, because a emerging brand is really like trying to get that business, and I'm just like, y'all, it's not worth it, because as soon as you ruin that relationship with that retailer, they will never trust you again. Yeah. So I just think like it all goes back to the communication, the being like open and honest, just like no matter what, like that should be at the forefront of your relationship with the retailer. And I just think that like nothing should jeopardize that relationship, and communication is like the lack thereof, or poor communication, or incorrect communication is just the easiest way to really like screw that up.
Yes. Woo. Yeah, hopefully no one makes that mistake, because I was sitting there listening going, no, they're not going to do. But sometimes you do. I hear what you're saying. Sometimes you are desperate, or you're worried, or you think that won't be that bad, but it will be. You have to think long term for these things, because to your point, this isn't a short term play. Big retail is never a short term play. It should not be.
No.
Right?
No.
I mean, unless you're talking like a TJ Maxx where you're doing a short time buy, it's an in and out, but it's an end of inventory sell. So it's totally different than the types of retail relationships we're talking about. That is a long-term play.
Well, and another thing that I thought of too is I think that you guys, another mistake, and this is less from the retailer side and more so like when I was in the emerging brand space and helping emerging brands, be super honest or like realistic about your timeline. Having been in, I've been in new product development, project management, and I was a buffer queen because I never wanted to assume that everything was going to be perfect. Now, I knew about the buffer. Nobody else knew about the buffer, but I knew, right? Because I'm trying to protect us. But I think please make sure that you're working with people who are going to be realistic about your timeline. Because I also feel like there's this thing that emerging brands, again, because they're so desperate and they really want to have that relationship with that retailer. If you cannot make an August date, do not say you can make an August date. Because guess what you're going to end up doing? Expediting the crap out of everything you do. And guess what that is? An expense that I guarantee you a retailer would have been willing to wait the additional 3 to 4 months to get it. You know what I mean? So like,
oh yeah, they didn't want to wait for the sales though. They didn't want to wait for the sales
miss
to
out on
actualize.
Yeah.
But you're right. It's like, it doesn't necessarily even like pan out most of the time.
No, it really doesn't. So like, if you can't make a date, I promise you, it's almost like, I feel like something that I hear a lot of is like, if the job is meant for you, if this is meant for you, if the retailer was meant for you, they will still be there, I promise. But you know what won't be there? The retailer, if you mess up. So please, please, please just like be honest and realistic about timelines and expectations. I think that's another thing that emerging brands kind of end up falling on the sword for. So
yeah, that's a really good one. And then to your point, it's like they've been here before. So chances are you probably aren't the first brand who may have said, ooh, something happened, or ooh. Now, that doesn't mean that they're happy about it.
No.
But they're understanding. Now, I also think, though, to your point, you probably have about one free pass on that one. And then after that one free pass, you better come correct. So, make sure you have the team in place. And that's where, that even brings me to this. If you find that if a brand is finding, man, we're having inventory challenges, we're not able to fulfill these orders, what do you think they should do? Is that like you fire someone, you hire someone? Like, how do you address the issue if the issue is internal management as opposed to like supply chain or other things that are less outside of your control?
Right. If you can control it, you need to control it. So if you initially hired, whether it be someone on your payroll or someone that you've contracted out, and they are not delivering what they said, and maybe that's what you need to put in your contract, like we're talking about physical inventory that has financial implications to your bottom line. So if they are not delivering on one of the most critical parts of your business, they need to go. All right. They need to go. And that's why I think it is so important to make sure that you are hiring the right people. But I would say, because I think a lot of times too, sometimes these emerging brands or smaller mom and pop brands, it's like they want to employ a friend or a family member or things like that. And I'm like, are they an expert? If they are not an expert,
don't hire
them. Sorry, we're in the business of making money, not in the business of, giving, I don't know, Joe Schmo a job. Right. So yeah, I would say like, especially on the inventory front. Inventory mistakes are really, really damaging. And so I think that be mindful of who you hire. And if you didn't hire the right person, you should allow yourself permission to find someone else that's going to fulfill that need better. So yeah, that would be my very blunt POV.
No, but that's good. That's good. Because sometimes it is like, okay, this 3PL is not doing what they said they were going to do. Fire them. Fire them. And
let them go.
On that, like if you're talking to 3PL, talk to other people who have worked with them. Ask them for a referral list. And do your own research, because
do the research. Yes. Please don't ever go. Like, I think another thing is we all are in the digital age of like, let me Google and let me find somebody. And that first person that's the cheapest, the most accessible, like sometimes those things are red flags. So make sure that you're doing your due diligence of understanding who they've worked with. Talk to some other people if you're able to find other people. Make sure you're asking them, like really have like an hour long kind of like intro session with these 3PLs that you're going to be working with, or even an individual that you might be hiring. Like be proby, probe, dig, because it's I cannot, like, it gives me chills when I think about some of the brands that I've worked with that just kind of like leisurely write checks to just not the right people. And it, at the end of the day, ends up being, you have to go back and like do the work all over again. It's actually not helpful.
It's very much giving, make it make sense.
Right. The math this isn't even girl math. It's just math.
Exactly. As we talk a lot about inventory and managing things at the actual retail store, I am curious a little bit about the supply chain side. Do you think it's important for brands to diversify their supplier base? I know when COVID hit, and I was working at Anthropologie as a senior buyer, we thought, oh, shoot, all of our stuff is in this one location. So now we should, look to moving it to this location or this location. And I mean, for a variety of reasons. In some cases, you can get better costing, but also if that place is not able to send things for a time frame, the other place can.
Yep, absolutely. I think this is something that retailers across, the entire industry are just like really having to think about, is that kind of diverse portfolio of suppliers. Because of, I think, number one, we did realize that like if all of our stuff is over in one place and suddenly something else happens, like we're all up crap creek, right? So definitely, I think for even just the safety and security of like being able to access things in different locations, I think to your point, speed to market, I think that's one of the biggest things that right now as we see even some of these really big like DTC companies that it's like speed is like everything they're getting really quickly. I think it's something to be super mindful of, is like you still have to be relevant amongst the competition. And so if, DTC retailer or even like, big retailer over here is able to get me something in 3 days versus you're going to wait 10 days to get it to me, like, guess who I'm going to? I'm going to 3 days. Right, exactly. So I think, yes, definitely be mindful of the diversification of your supplier base, but only if it serves your brand, I guess. Like I would say, like, because I also think that there's an element of like, you still want to make sure that you're doing the best for your brand like identity, and your, you want to make sure that you are being of service to like your end goal. So even if you want to look to diversify your supplier base, if you are having them work on a formula for you and they can't match it, don't jeopardize the integrity of your formula just to say that I am able to diversify my supplier base. Because if they're not able to give you what you need, then it's kind of defeats the purpose. So do it within reason. Absolutely. Know that it does tend to come at a little bit of an additional cost, especially depending on where you are sourcing from. So also like don't assume that just because it costs more that it's a better or worse value. Like you have to really think about like kind of what you're gaining in other realms other than just kind of like that bottom line profitability. So yes, in short, yes, absolutely. Think about diversifying. I think if it makes sense for your business, but don't feel like you also too, like just because everyone else is doing it, that you have to do it. Especially if you're smaller, like you're still learning, like don't bite off more than you can chew, essentially. Yeah.
That part. So many good things. Look, I feel like we covered so much with regards to inventory management. And it's, again, just talking about from supply chain to demand forecasting to communication. There's really a lot in it, to allow that to kind of run as a smooth machine. What, if any, advice, just in closing, would you give to emerging brands looking to scale their business? And this can be related to inventory management, or it can be kind of just general advice that you would provide. Would love to hear it.
I would say I'm thinking back to a CEO that I had worked with on one of the brands that I'd worked with. And I think what she had done so well, and would be my piece of advice, is be curious and know about every function of your brand. And what I mean by that is understand what goes into product development and formula curation. Know what goes into supply chain management and, working with a 3PL. Know what goes into, marketing and social media and, digital presence. Like, make sure if you're going to really own and run a brand that, like, I'm not saying be an expert, right? That's why you hire people. But really understand, and I think this is one of the things that I learned the most as being a project manager, is like, make sure that you know enough to be dangerous. Because the last thing that you want to do is to go into, especially these conversations with these retailers, and not necessarily showcase your like depth of knowledge. And that doesn't mean, again, going back to, it's not that you have to be an expert in every single realm. Again, that's why we hire a team. But I also think that as an emerging brand, something that sets you apart is actually being curious and knowledgeable about like what you're actually putting out there. It's not just your brand story, but it's how you get it to where you need to get it to, how you develop the product. Like, it's all of that is actually your brand story. It's not just the story that you tell on your front page. So at least for me, as like an operations minded individual, like, I just think that we really need to understand like what actually makes our ecosystem work, like what makes our brand come to life. I think that'll also just make you a better leader, a better, CEO, able to talk about your brand. And I think it will end up paying off in the long run, because you'll also understand your customer and like what they want and all of that. So that would be my biggest piece of advice, is just like make sure that you're staying curious and that you're staying knowledgeable. And that'll take you farther than you think.
That's so good. And also just reiterating why I think the CEO job can be one of the toughest ones ever. Because while you said, to your point, you don't have to be an expert at everything, but you kind of need to know enough to know when someone isn't doing what they're supposed to be doing. First of all, because how can you identify if someone's not doing what they're supposed to be doing if you have no clue? And then also to kind of know where your knowledge stops and where the next person that you need to bring in, who needs to be that subject matter expert, can come in to help connect those dots for you. Look, Shannara, thank you so much for being on the show. This was super helpful. I know these episodes are like so nitty gritty in the detail of the specifics for retail, but I also feel like at the same time, like you can't find this. This is not on the internet, you know?
It really isn't. You got to know somebody that knows somebody, for sure.
Somebody that knows somebody. And I can tell from just from the conversation that we have that I thought I knew something about inventory management. And I'm like, oh no. I mean, I'm realizing, I knew a little something, but it was a little. It was little. So thank you so much. I think really fantastic insights for brands and just things to keep in mind. I'll make sure that if there's any resources to share, we'll include that in the show notes. And thank you again.
You're very welcome. Thank you so much for having me. And, just good luck to everyone out there. I think like you guys are doing amazing work, and we're living the dream.
Thank you again to Shannara for coming on the show and sharing all things inventory management. As I shared when I spoke with her, I thought I knew things about inventory management, but there was so much that I was missing out on. There's a lot that you can learn, and this is one of those areas that as a founder, I recommend that if you don't have the expertise there, hire a consultant, or that can also be alternatively your first hire full-time is that operations specialist, someone who can know how to run and operate that side of the business because it is super critical to your success. Again, if you don't have inventory, you can't grow sales. I hope this episode was helpful, and as always, please leave us a comment or leave us a review on Apple, iTunes, or on Spotify. It really helps to boost the show. Thank you as always for listening, and I'll catch you on the next episode. Bye.